The invitation came in the mail, not as a text, not as an email, but a pale cream envelope with Ava's full name printed in tight, controlled script, the kind her mother favored for thank you cards and Christmas letters. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Linda Everly did not do casual, and she certainly didn't do warmth. Ava stared at it for hours before opening it, the envelope propped on the corner of her kitchen counter like a ticking thing. When she finally slid her finger beneath the seal, the paper made a soft tearing sound, delicate and surgical. Inside was a folded card, embossed with roses, and scripted with polite formality. You are cordially invited to the Everly family reunion, same weekend as always, same house, same people. Her name wasn't handwritten inside, it was typed. She could almost hear her mother's clipped tone behind the words. Ava placed the card back on the counter and stared at it, like it might rearrange itself into something more personal, more honest. Something like, we'd love to see you. I miss you. Let's talk. But Linda didn't do emotional honesty, not with Ava. 3 years had passed since they last spoke in person. Not since Claire's wedding, where Ava had been seated at the farthest table, past the cousins, past the floral arrangements, past even the second-tier friends. Like a distant obligation. Linda had looked right through her that night. Claire had apologized in hushed tones, but Ava knew the seating plan hadn't been a mistake. Now, suddenly, an invitation, a reappearance. Her first instinct was to ignore it, drop it in the trash, let it disappear with the pizza flyers and grocery coupons. But her fingers hovered. She thought about the way Linda always introduced Claire, my daughter, the pediatric surgeon. Harvard, of course. Ava had once overheard her mother telling a distant relative that Ava worked with numbers or computers or something in New York, as though her job as a data scientist were too confusing or too embarrassing to articulate. But this year would be different. Ava had just accepted a lead position at one of the top AI research firms in the country. She had a team, a patent in her name, an apartment that cost more than her childhood home. Still, none of it mattered if the person who made you believe that your worth was always a few inches short of enough. Her thumb brushed the edge of the invitation. She didn't want to go. And yet, deep down, she did. Because even now, some foolish, fragile part of her still believed that one day, her mother might see her clearly and not flinch. Ava slid the card into her purse without making a decision. But her heart already had. Claire was always the good daughter, the kind who knew how to say the right thing at the right time, whose life fit into the crisp outline Linda had traced in her head before either of them were born. Claire smiled with her teeth, wore pearls without irony, and called their mother every Sunday afternoon like it was sacred ritual. Ava tried, once, to match the rhythm, but even as a child, her steps always landed offbeat. At every reunion, Claire moved through the rooms like she belonged there, and maybe she did. The house, the stories, the legacy. It all wrapped around her like a tailored coat. Ava, on the other hand, felt like a temporary guest in a family she shared blood with, but not language. She remembered one year, maybe she was 16, standing by the dessert table while their aunt explained loudly to a neighbor that Ava was a little artsy, still figuring things out, while Claire had just been elected student body president and accepted early to Duke. Everyone had clapped. Ava had smiled. There had been no applause when she made the National Science Fair finals. No spotlight when she won a scholarship that covered 4 years of undergrad. Just a passing mention over dinner. Good. At least you won't be a burden. It wasn't that Claire was cruel. If anything, she tried to even the scales. She'd sit next to Ava during the longest dinners, nudge her when Ava shrank too far into herself, make faces across the table when the conversation turned critical. But even kindness felt like a performance in that house. Another role Claire had mastered. The peacekeeper, the favorite, the daughter who fit. Now, sitting in her apartment as the late light filtered in through west-facing windows, Ava scrolled through Claire's Instagram, baby photos, charity galas, a feature in Boston Magazine. Her life looked like a brochure for the kind of woman their mother admired, gracious, maternal, camera-ready. Ava's last post was a black and white photo of a prototype she'd been developing, captioned with a joke no one in the family would get. They'd always been two sides of a mirror, she and Claire, one shining, the other smudged. Linda used to introduce them with that brittle smile, This is Claire, and this is Ava, our little rebel. As if rebellion were Ava's only defining trait. Not intelligence, not grit, just resistance. She wondered, not for the first time, if she'd been born wrong, or if love in their family had always come with pre-written instructions, and Ava had simply refused to read them. The invitation still sat on the counter. Claire had probably RSVP'd already, with a perfect reply and a casserole in hand. Ava wasn't sure what she'd bring, only that if she went, she wouldn't come as the family's shadow anymore. There were rules in the Everly house, not written down, not spoken aloud, but enforced with surgical precision. Linda didn't yell, she didn't need to. A look, a tilt of the head, a pause too long. It was enough. You learned quickly what pleased her and what didn't. Claire somehow always knew. Ava didn't. When Ava was 7, she brought home a finger painting from school. Bright swirls of orange and blue that bled over the page in chaotic joy. She held it up with the pride only a child can feel, certain it would earn a spot on the fridge. Linda had looked at it, one eyebrow barely lifted, and said, "Next time, try using fewer colors. It's too messy." The paper never made it past the kitchen counter. That was the day Ava stopped painting. Claire brought home ballet recital photos, piano trophies, neatly typed essays with gold stars in the corner. Linda would smooth Claire's hair behind her ear and say, "Of course you did well. You prepared. You followed instructions." Ava learned what wasn't said aloud, that love came in exchange for order, for neatness, for control. By 13, Ava had grown sharp in all the wrong places. She asked too many questions, laughed too loudly, forgot to say thank you in the exact tone Linda expected. Claire reminded her gently, like a translator speaking on behalf of a foreigner. But even her sister's kindness felt like a subtle reprimand. You should know better by now. There was one evening burnt into memory when Ava scored a 98 on a history exam and presented it like a trophy at the dinner table. Claire had just been elected class vice president. Linda looked at both of them, her lips pressed into something that might have been pride for Claire, then turned to Ava. "You missed 2 questions. Careless." She passed the salt without looking. It was always like that, close but never close enough. In high school, Ava gave up on winning. She dyed her hair black and started wearing boots with silver buckles. The rebellion wasn't about fashion, it was survival. If she couldn't be the daughter her mother wanted, at least she could own being the one she didn't. But the scars stayed, deep and quiet. Even now, years later, Ava caught herself softening her voice on phone calls with Linda, checking her posture during visits, removing the edge from her opinions. She'd built a life far away, but some part of her still carried the rules inside her skin. Don't make a scene, don't speak too much, don't outshine or disappoint. Be less. That was the real inheritance. Not the monogrammed silver or the old colonial house, but the internalized belief that love was conditional, and she'd never quite earned it. Ava stared at the soft rug beneath the therapist's chair, tracing its faint geometric pattern with her eyes like it held some kind of answer. The question still hung in the air, quiet and unassuming, but sharp around the edges. What would happen if you stopped trying to win your mother's approval? Dr. Keene said it gently, like all her questions, her voice even and low, never pushing, just placing the truth between them like a cup of water Ava didn't have to drink unless she was ready. "I don't know," Ava said finally, though she did. Of course she did. "I think I wouldn't know who I am." Dr. Keene tilted her head. "You mean your identity is still wrapped around her opinion?" Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched a slice of light crawl up the office wall, the way the late afternoon sun always did in this room. There was something unfair about how peaceful the space felt when the conversation inside it felt anything but. "It's not that I care what she thinks," Ava said slowly. "It's that I still want her to, I don't know, see me, like, really see me." Dr. Keene didn't nod or fill the space, didn't jump in with affirmations or insights. She just waited. "I think," Ava continued, "I've spent my whole life achieving things so she'd have to notice, so she'd have no choice but to say, 'Well done.' But she never does. And I keep going anyway, hoping the next thing will be the one that finally counts." There it was, the quiet center of her exhaustion, that endless hunger she never acknowledged out loud. It hit harder in this room, where excuses couldn't hide behind cleverness or sarcasm. Dr. Keene leaned forward slightly. What if she never will? Ava blinked. Never? She's had 32 years to try, and even when you handed her a reason, she didn't take it. So what would your life look like if you accepted that her love, her approval, it's not something you can earn? Ava swallowed hard. It felt like betrayal, even thinking it. Like giving up on a story she'd been trying to rewrite since childhood. Then I'd have to stop performing, she whispered. I'd have to start choosing things for me, not for her, not for anyone else. Does that scare you? Yes, Ava said. Because what if I've never really lived my own life? What if everything I've built has been about proving her wrong? And what if, Dr. Keene asked softly, proving her wrong isn't the same as being right for yourself? Ava looked up, meeting her therapist's gaze. There was no judgment there, just an invitation. She didn't know if she was ready, but for the first time, she wondered what it might feel like to walk into that reunion not as a hopeful daughter, but as someone who didn't need to be chosen anymore. The dress wasn't just a dress. Ava knew that the moment she stepped into the boutique. The lighting was soft and golden, the kind that made everyone look slightly better than they actually were, and the racks were filled with careful choices, dresses that whispered success rather than shouted it. That was the goal, wasn't it? To walk into the reunion polished, composed, and impossible to ignore, but also impossible to criticize. She flipped past sequins, too desperate, past bold prints, too loud, past the backless silks and plunging necklines, too much. Each hanger she touched was a quiet negotiation, not too flashy, not too plain. She caught herself wondering what her mother would say and hated that she still cared. The sales associate approached, chirpy and polished, looking for something special. Ava almost laughed. Family reunion. The woman tilted her head, sympathetic in that way only strangers can be. Ah, got it. She brought options, structured navy, sleek taupe, a deep forest green that made Ava think of country clubs and cold approval. She tried them on one by one, watching herself in the mirror under the boutique's forgiving lights. Each time, a version of herself stared back. Versions molded by years of second-guessing. The dresses were fine, she looked fine, but nothing felt like hers. Then she found it, tucked behind a rack of neutrals, an understated black sheath with a high neckline and barely there cap sleeves. Elegant, but with a sharp edge. The fabric hugged without clinging. It didn't beg for attention, but it wouldn't be ignored either. Ava stepped into it like stepping into armor. And for the first time in the afternoon, she didn't ask what her mother would think. She asked what she thought. She liked the answer. Still, as she stood at the register, card in hand, doubt crept in. She imagined Linda's cool gaze sweeping over her, landing on the hemline, the fit. A little severe, don't you think? Or worse, you always dress so stark. There would be no win. Ava knew that. Yet here she was spending nearly half a paycheck on a dress for a woman who would never say she looked beautiful. Or right. Or enough. As the associate wrapped the dress in tissue, Ava felt a strange mix of shame and pride. Shame for still playing the game. Pride for at least choosing her own piece this time. Back on the street, shopping bag in hand, she paused in front of a store window and caught her reflection. She looked like a woman preparing for battle, but beneath the tailored coat and neat hair, something looser stirred. Not confidence exactly, but readiness. Not to win her mother over, just to stand her ground when the storm hit. The highway stretched out in front of her like a dare. Ava kept one hand on the wheel, the other curled loosely in her lap, fingers twitching every time she passed an exit she could take instead. There were a dozen ways not to go home. Scenic detours, coffee shops, 100 justifications for turning around. But she kept going, maybe out of habit, maybe because she needed to see it through this time. The miles rolled by in silence, save for the steady hum of tires and the occasional wind gust that buffeted her little car. She didn't play music. It felt dishonest. Nothing cheerful would fit, and anything too melancholic would tip her over. So she let the quiet hold her. Somewhere outside New Haven, she caught herself thinking about the last time she'd made this drive. Claire's baby shower, pastel balloons, finger sandwiches, a game where people guessed the baby's weight. Ava had brought a gift from a Brooklyn boutique that was handmade and ethically sourced. Linda hadn't even unwrapped it, just passed it down the table with a distracted nod. Later, Claire had hugged her and said, "Mom was just overwhelmed. You know how she gets." Ava had smiled, like she always did. Now, the trees blurred past, green, then green again. The same landscape she'd memorized as a teenager staring out the passenger window, hoping the world was bigger than the inside of their house. And it was. It really was. She'd built a whole life out there, a job with actual impact, friends who saw her, a dog-eared apartment in the city that smelled like lavender and freedom. And yet, none of that seemed to register back home. To them, she was still the one who wore eyeliner too thick in high school, the one who asked if it was okay to skip Thanksgiving once and was treated like she'd burned the turkey herself. Her family clung to an outdated version of her like it was scripture, as if Ava had stopped growing the moment she moved away. But she had changed. She wasn't 19 anymore. She didn't shrink when someone raised their voice. She didn't apologize just to make things easier. She'd learned how to live without asking permission. Still, her hands were sweating. Ahead, the exit sign loomed. Green Hollow, 2 miles. Ava's chest tightened with old muscle memory. Same dread, same hope. As if this time might be different. As if her mother might greet her with softness. Her father with pride. Claire with something more than polished empathy. She knew better, but still, she slowed in the right lane, blinked on her signal, and took the turn. Not because she expected to be seen, because she was finally ready not to need it. The Everly house hadn't changed. Same white shutters, same immaculate lawn trimmed to military precision. The hydrangeas bloomed in their soft blue clusters like they did every June, as though even the flowers obeyed her mother's vision of order. Ava parked at the far end of the drive, under the shadow of the old oak tree. She sat there for a minute, engine ticking, stomach tight. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Maybe it was her. Maybe growing up meant realizing the things that once loomed large weren't so towering after all. Just carefully arranged illusions. She grabbed the garment bag from the back seat, the dress she'd chosen with such quiet defiance, and walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked against the stone path like a countdown. Her mother opened the door before Ava could knock. Linda wore a cream blouse and slacks in some muted, expensive shade of green. Her lipstick was perfect. Her expression wasn't warm or cold, just precise. "Ava, you're here," she said, as though surprised she'd actually come. "Hi, Mom." They exchanged a brief, brittle hug, the kind that left no scent, no crease in the fabric. Ava stepped inside and was hit by the familiar smell of lemon polish and old paper. The house still wore its silence like a badge. "You can use the guest room down the hall," Linda said, already turning back toward the kitchen. "Dinner is at 6 sharp. Claire and the kids will be here soon." The guest room, not your room, not welcome back. Ava smiled tightly and carried her things down the hall. Her father passed her in the corridor not long after, coffee in hand, phone at his ear. He gave her a distracted nod, barely meeting her eyes. Ava paused, waiting, but he just kept walking. At 5:45, Claire arrived. The air shifted. Laughter rolled in ahead of her like a warm front. Ava stood at the edge of the foyer as the door opened, and Claire swept in with the practiced ease of someone used to entrances. Her dress was floral, her hair undone in the exact right way. One child clung to her leg, another darted toward the kitchen with a shout. "Claire, darling," Linda practically beamed, stepping forward with real arms, real warmth. Their father appeared from nowhere to kiss her cheek. "You look radiant," he said. There was applause from the living room, actual applause, as Claire's husband followed her in carrying a pie, and Ava stood back, invisible. She took a slow breath, folded her arms, and leaned against the doorway, watching the performance. Same stage, same actors, same script. She'd once waited for a cue that never came, but tonight, she wasn't here to play a part. She was just here to watch the show for what it really was. The dining room looked like a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, candles flickering in their silver holders. Everything symmetrical, everything curated. Even the wine had its own little speech when it was poured. Vintage, origin, food pairings. Linda spared no detail when it came to appearances. Ava's name card was tucked near the end of the table, beside a cousin's husband whose name she couldn't remember, and a neighbor who'd been invited because he helped Dad regrout the patio last fall. Claire naturally sat dead center, framed by candlelight and compliments, her kids flanking her like well-dressed satellites. Ava smoothed her napkin onto her lap and reached for her water. She didn't drink wine at these things anymore. One glass, and she might actually say what she was thinking. "So, Ava," her aunt began from across the table, already smiling too wide, "still in that tech job?" Before Ava could answer, her mother chimed in with her usual soft ice. "It's something with computers, or data, very specialized, I think." She didn't look at Ava when she said it. "I build predictive models," Ava replied, keeping her voice even. "Right now, I lead a team designing AI-based forecasting systems for global risk portfolios." There was a pause, brief, brittle. "Well," the neighbor said, adjusting his tie. "Sounds complicated, not like real estate." Claire laughed lightly, the kind of sound people lean into. "Ava's always been the smart one," she said. As if that made it better, as if that explained the distance. "Too smart for her own good," their father added, not even looking up from his plate. "Used to correct her teachers in school, made them crazy." A few chuckles followed, the kind of laughter that asked you to join in or mark yourself as the problem. Ava smiled, tight, polite, the kind you'd wear in a hostage photo. She picked up her fork and focused on her asparagus. Claire's daughter was passing around handmade place cards she'd made at school. Ava's name was missing. Her mother tutted softly. "It's not intentional, darling. She's just young." "Of course," Ava said. "Wouldn't want to misplace the golden child." Silence bloomed. Then laughter, nervous, awkward, the kind people use to sweep things quickly under the rug. Linda cleared her throat. "Let's keep it light, please. It's a family dinner." Ava took another bite. The taste was fine, but it sat in her mouth like ash. She looked down the table at Claire, effortlessly charming, glowing in a way Ava knew came from being consistently believed in. The candles flickered, the room murmured, the performance continued. And Ava, cast once again in the role no one had asked her to play, wondered how many more dinners she'd endure before finally stepping off the stage for good. Claire was mid-story, a glass of Chardonnay in hand, the room leaning toward her like plants chasing sunlight. She had just returned from a speaking engagement in D.C., something about pediatric care reform, though she glossed over the details in favor of the more charming bits. Travel woes, backstage anecdotes, compliments from other doctors that she passed off as humble brags. Ava counted 3 separate, "Oh, Claire, you're too modest" interruptions before dessert even hit the table. Their father beamed like he'd won something. Linda nodded in silent approval, her hand occasionally brushing Claire's sleeve in those small, practiced gestures of maternal pride. Claire's husband chimed in just enough to highlight her achievements, but never too much to distract from them. It was a choreography they'd mastered. Ava sipped her water and let the conversation wash over her. She didn't expect it to swing her way. It rarely did. And if it did, it was only for Linda to pivot, to turn whatever she said into something smaller, manageable, palatable. "She's on a charity board now," their aunt offered, leaning in. "Some literacy initiative for underserved schools." "Children for Change," Claire clarified, her voice smooth and light. "It's really rewarding work. And with everything else, the timing just felt right. You have to give back." "You're incredible, Claire," someone said. And the table agreed in a chorus of nods and murmurs. Ava's dessert plate remained untouched. She pushed the spoon gently through the whipped cream, watching the layers shift. She wanted to say something about her recent project being selected by a UN tech task force, about the offer she'd just received from a company in Zurich. But she knew how it would go. They wouldn't understand the language of her world, or worse, they'd pretend to. And Linda would make a quiet joke about Ava always being the serious one, as though seriousness were a flaw. Claire would smile with sympathy. Everyone would move on, so she stayed quiet. "And how's the city treating you, Ava?" asked one of the cousins, almost as an afterthought. Ava looked up, caught off guard. "Good," she said, clearing her throat. "Busy? We just wrapped a 6-month forecasting initiative that—" "She's always got her head in something complicated," Linda interrupted with a gentle smile, cutting clean across the sentence. "Numbers and models and such. A few polite laughs followed. Claire refilled her wine glass. Ava nodded, swallowed the rest of her sentence. She folded her hands in her lap, the way she used to in church, when the sermon wasn't for her. The table moved on. Claire was talking about a new private school she was considering for the kids. Her voice was the thread everything hung on. Ava leaned back slightly, watching the performance unfold, wondering if anyone else noticed she hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, wondering if it would matter if she didn't speak at all. The question always came eventually, wrapped in a smile, laced with faux concern, and just enough sugar to make it feel like conversation instead of judgment. "So Ava," her Aunt Sylvia began, swirling wine in a crystal glass, "any special someone in your life these days?" Ava didn't flinch. She'd heard it too many times to be caught off guard now. Sylvia leaned in slightly, like the answer would be whispered, maybe scandalous. Around the table, a few heads turned, subtle but unmistakable. "No one right now," Ava said lightly, "just focusing on work." Sylvia made a soft clucking noise, the sound people reserve for bruised fruit or lost causes. "Such a shame. You've got so much going for you. Beautiful, smart. You must be intimidating, I suppose." Ava smiled, a practiced curve of the lips that gave nothing away. She reached for her water. "I always told her she'd need to soften a little," Linda added, not looking up from her salad. "Men don't usually want to be challenged at the dinner table." The table chuckled. Ava did too, just enough to keep things smooth. Keep the peace, keep the script going. "I challenge people at the dinner table," Claire said brightly, dabbing her mouth with her napkin. "But I do it with charm, right?" She glanced at her husband, who offered a doting nod. "Of course you do," Linda said. "You know how to balance things." The implication hung in the air like perfume. Claire was the full package. Ava was the cautionary tale. Some people just aren't cut out for family. Linda hadn't meant it cruelly. Or maybe she had. Either way, the words fell neatly into place, like something she'd rehearsed. Ava felt them more than heard them, a quiet thud just below the ribcage. She didn't let it show. That was the rule. Don't let it show. "I guess I was too busy building my own life," she said with a shrug, voice cool. "Didn't want to borrow someone else's to feel complete." A few people looked down at their plates. Claire's fork froze briefly above her risotto. Linda took another sip of wine. "Well, everyone chooses their path." Ava nodded. "Yes, they do." She smiled again, wider this time. Not warm, not cruel, just unshakable. The kind of smile you wear when you've built your own house brick by brick, only to visit someone else's and be told the paint color is wrong. Around her, the conversation picked back up, sliding neatly into safer territory. Kid milestones, vacation plans, the new neighbor's loud lawnmower. Ava sat there, untouched by it all, her smile steady, her appetite gone, the weight of not belonging pressing gently but persistently against her chest. The clinking began softly, knives against glasses, murmurs turning to silence as Linda rose from her chair, napkin folded neatly beside her untouched plate. She held her wine glass aloft, like it was part of a ritual. The dining room dimmed under the chandelier's glow, and Ava felt her stomach tighten, the way it always did when her mother took the floor. Something about Linda's posture warned of polished cruelty in pretty packaging. "I just want to say a few words," Linda began, voice warm and precise. "It's not often we get to sit around the same table, all of us. Life pulls us in different directions, families, careers, cities, but tonight, we're together." A few nods, murmurs of agreement. Ava glanced at Claire, who sat with effortless poise, wine glass already in hand. Their father watched Linda with the same absent admiration he reserved for his favorite paintings, valuable, familiar, never quite examined. Linda turned toward Claire first, her gaze softening. "To my daughter Claire, graceful, accomplished, a wonderful mother and wife. You've always been steady, thoughtful, everything I could have hoped for in a daughter." The table clapped, a few guests letting out polite awes. Claire smiled, modest, radiant. She lowered her eyes just enough to seem humble. "And to Ava." Linda's tone shifted, still composed, still smiling, but different. "My strong-willed, brilliant Ava." Ava's spine straightened. "You've always taken your own path," Linda said, her eyes holding Ava's now. "Even when it wasn't the easier one. even when it meant growing pains. You've challenged me in ways I didn't expect, tested boundaries I didn't know I had. The table was still, the kind of quiet that happens when people sense something real might be said. And while I can't say it's always been easy, Linda continued, lifting her glass slightly higher, I will say this: I have one daughter who made me proud, and one who made me stronger, through regret. Silence then, sharp, complete. It wasn't a slap, not exactly. It was worse. It was a clean incision, done with a practiced hand and a polite smile. No shouting, no scene, just the kind of line you couldn't unhear once it had been drawn. Ava didn't move. She felt her breath sitting shallow in her chest, felt every eye swing toward her and then quickly away, like the heat of it might burn. Linda sipped her wine. Claire stared into her lap. Someone coughed. Ava reached for her glass and raised it. To regret, she said, voice calm, eyes locked on her mother. It certainly builds character. No one laughed. Ava didn't expect them to. She took a sip, then set the glass down with a quiet clink and looked away. Let the silence speak this time. The room didn't erupt, it just cracked. Ava stood slowly, careful not to scrape the chair against the hardwood floor. Every movement felt loud, exposed. Her legs carried her on muscle memory alone. She didn't look at anyone, not at Claire, not at her mother, not at the faces caught between pity and discomfort. The dining room buzzed faintly with the sound of people pretending nothing had happened, the delicate clink of silverware resuming its choreography, like a machine jolted back into motion. No one said her name. She walked down the hallway, past framed portraits that told a version of family she no longer recognized, past the floral wallpaper that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and control. Her hands were trembling, not visibly, but deep in the joints. The kind of tremble that didn't come from fear, but from something heavier, a quiet collapse. In the powder room, she braced herself against the sink. Her reflection stared back, cheeks flushed, eyes too bright. She looked almost composed, which felt like its own betrayal. She wanted to scream, to sob, to punch something just hard enough to prove she was real. Instead, she turned on the faucet, let the water run until it was ice cold, pressed her fingers beneath it like it might rinse the shame off. Through regret. The words echoed, measured, polished, public. A compliment dressed in a bullet. From the hallway, faint voices drifted in. Someone, Uncle David maybe, was saying, "She's always been a little sensitive." Another added, "Linda shouldn't have said it, but Ava takes things so personally." Ava dried her hands, slowly, mechanically. She straightened her posture, reapplied her lipstick with the same steady hand she used to lead high-stakes presentations. Then she opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. Claire was still at the table, still talking, or maybe just nodding. Ava couldn't tell. She didn't stop her. The front door was easy to find in a house she once knew by heart. Shoes on, clutch in hand, heart pounding not from panic, but from clarity. She opened the door, stepped into the night. The air outside was damp, thick with the scent of summer rain that hadn't arrived yet. She paused on the porch, looking up at the stars scattered across a sky that felt wider than the house behind her. No one followed. Not Claire, not her mother, not even one of the guests with an empty apology ready on their tongue. Ava took the steps slowly, each one a quiet act of defiance. When she reached her car, she hesitated. Hands on the door handle, breath held. Then she got in, and this time, she didn't look back. The guest room was still cold, no matter how high Ava turned the dial on the radiator. The walls were bare, except for a framed print of a watercolor landscape. One of those generic, forgettable scenes meant to be soothing. She'd been 10 when it was put there. She remembered because she'd asked for posters. Instead, she got muted pastels and silence. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half packed from earlier that afternoon, when she still thought she might stay the night. She moved quickly now, folding the dress she hadn't worn, stuffing chargers and toiletries into side compartments. She didn't want to linger, not in this room, not in this house. But as she reached for a paperback on the nightstand, the same copy of Little Women she used to read under the covers with a flashlight, something slipped out from between the pages. A folded envelope, yellowed at the corners, tucked neatly like a secret. Her name was written on the front in soft, looping script that wasn't Linda's. Ava sat down on the edge of the bed. Her fingers hesitated at the crease before unfolding it. The paper crackled. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. It was dated over 20 years ago. Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the right moment to tell you in person. Or maybe I was too afraid to try. That's probably more honest. She froze. The voice was familiar, not in tone but in the shape of it, like something half-remembered from a dream. You were never a mistake. You need to know that. I made choices I thought were best at the time. Maybe they weren't. But loving you has never been hard. Not once. The signature was only initials, E.L. Not Linda. Not anyone she could immediately place. But the emotion in the letter pulsed like a heartbeat. This wasn't written out of obligation. It was confession. Something tender, almost desperate. Ava read it again. And again. The edges of the paper trembled in her hands, but the center remained steady. Whoever wrote it had known her, loved her, wanted her to understand something that had been buried long before she'd ever questioned why she didn't quite fit. She folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope. The suitcase stood open, waiting, but her thoughts were already elsewhere, years back, in questions unasked, in answers suddenly beginning to form. Outside, the night was still and dense with crickets. Her mother's house silent. The lights dimmed, like the show was over. And maybe it was. Ava zipped the suitcase closed. This time, the weight didn't feel like loss. It felt like something shifting, breaking open. A goodbye, yes, but maybe also a beginning. Ava didn't open the letter again until she was back in the city, her suitcase still by the door, coat draped over a chair like she'd just stepped in from any ordinary trip. But nothing about her return felt ordinary. The air inside her apartment was stale with stillness, the kind that settles when no one's been home in a while. Outside, traffic hummed and lights flickered on across the street, life moving forward in straight lines, while hers had just bent in a direction she hadn't expected. She sat on the couch, the envelope in her lap. The initials still stared up at her, E.L. Simple, careful, unfamiliar. She unfolded the letter again, slower this time, her hands steadier. Dear Ava, if this ever finds its way to you, I can only hope you're old enough to understand it was written with love, not regret. My name is Evan. I met your mother in college. We were young, serious in the way only 19-year-olds can be. She was fire and steel even then, but softer too. There was laughter between us once, and love, or something close to it. Ava read the lines in silence, her breath shallow. When she told me she was pregnant, we were both terrified. I wanted to stay, I wanted to figure it out. But her parents, your grandparents, had other ideas. Ideas that involved a fast engagement with someone more suitable. She said it was for the best, that she needed stability. I was a risk. She said goodbye and disappeared. I didn't fight hard enough. I've lived with that. Ava's throat tightened. She blinked, trying to keep the words in focus. For years I wondered. I thought maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd tell you about me when you were older, but silence became the decision. And I respected it, even though it hollowed me. I don't know if she ever meant for you to read this, but I couldn't stand the thought that you might grow up believing you were unplanned, unloved, or unworthy. You weren't, not for a second. There was no grand revelation, no demand, just a name, a story she'd never been told, a truth that had been wrapped in shame and hidden in a book from her childhood, like a secret waiting to exhale. Ava folded the letter again, gently this time. She stared out the window, the city glowing in fragments. Evan. A name that felt like something new, pressing up against everything she'd been taught to believe. Her entire life had been built on a lie, spoken quietly through omission. And now, one voice, one man, had cracked the silence. Not her father, but maybe, somehow, the beginning of something true. Ava dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang 3 times before the familiar voice answered, soft, careful, always composed. Hello? Hi, Grandma, Ava said, her voice quieter than she expected. It's me. Oh, sweetheart, are you all right? The concern came immediately, as if she'd been waiting for this call. Maybe she had. Ava hesitated, her fingers pressed to her temple. "Do you have a minute?" "For you?" "Always." She swallowed. The words felt thick in her throat. "I found something, a letter, from someone named Evan. He said he knew Mom, in college." There was a pause, not long, just long enough to confirm what Ava already suspected. "I see," her grandmother said carefully. Ava could picture her now, sitting in her favorite chair by the window, knitting abandoned in her lap, jaw set the way it always was when she didn't want to lie but couldn't quite tell the truth. "Did you know," Ava asked, "that I might not be Dad's?" Another pause, then a sigh, soft and full of old sorrow. "I suspected. For a long time." Ava's heart knocked hard in her chest. Even knowing didn't make hearing it easier. "I was there that summer," her grandmother continued, voice low. "Your mother came home different, quieter. She'd been seeing someone at school, someone we never met. Your grandfather found out and, well, he had expectations. About who she would marry, what our family should look like. Your father came from the right background. Steady job, clean reputation. Evan didn't fit." "But you knew," Ava said. "You knew she might have been pregnant with someone else's child." Her grandmother didn't answer right away. "Your mother said it would never matter, that once she married, once everything was settled, she would raise you as Richard's." And Richard agreed. I think, in their way, they both tried to believe that would be enough. "But it wasn't," Ava said flatly. "Not for him." "No," her grandmother said softly. "I don't believe it was. He could never quite love you the same." And she couldn't admit why, so the distance stayed. "And you paid for it." Ava felt something sharp twist in her chest. Anger, yes, but more than that. Grief. Grief for a version of her life that might have been different, if anyone had had the courage to tell her the truth before now. "I'm sorry, darling," her grandmother said. "You didn't deserve that." "No," Ava agreed. "I didn't." There was a long silence on the line. Then her grandmother added, so quietly Ava almost missed it. "But you were wanted. Maybe not by them the right way, but someone did." Ava closed her eyes. The words didn't fix it, but they landed in a place that had waited a long time to be seen. The house looked different at night. Not softer, just stripped down. The windows glowed dimly from within, and the porch light cast long shadows across the front walk. Ava stood at the bottom of the steps for a long time, the letter folded in her coat pocket, her breath fogging in the cool air. The weight of it all pressed against her ribs. 32 years of questions, of not quite belonging, of loving a mother who had only ever offered love with conditions attached. She knocked once, firm but not loud, the kind of knock that said, "I'm not here to play out a scene. I'm here for the truth." Linda opened the door in a robe, her hair pinned back, skin still perfectly matte. Her expression didn't flicker when she saw Ava. No surprise, no warmth. "Ava, what are you doing here?" she asked. Voice clipped. "I need to talk to you," Ava said. "It's important." Linda stepped aside without a word, her movements graceful, restrained. Ava followed her into the living room, where the same curated stillness hung in the air. The mantel was clean, the family photos as carefully arranged as always. Claire's graduation, Claire's wedding, Claire's children. Ava's face was there too, in one small frame pushed to the corner like an afterthought. Ava turned to her mother. "I found a letter from someone named Evan." Linda blinked, just once, then turned away, walking toward the fireplace as if she might adjust something that didn't need adjusting. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ava stepped closer. "Don't lie. Not this time. He wrote about you, about being in love, about you telling him you were pregnant, about you walking away." Linda didn't turn around. "That was a lifetime ago." "So it's true," Ava said. Her voice was steady, but something hot buzzed beneath her skin. "You knew, you always knew, and you let me grow up thinking it was me, my personality, my choices, my faults, that kept you and Dad from loving me like you loved Claire." Linda turned then, slowly, her face unreadable. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, tone flat. "I had no choice." "There's always a choice." "I made the one I had to," Linda replied. "You were a mistake I had to fix, so I did." Ava flinched, but didn't look away. The words landed like ice water, freezing everything. I gave you a name, a home, a future. You wouldn't have had that otherwise. Ava felt something crack, not break, just shift. A realignment of what she thought she needed from this moment. She stared at the woman in front of her, this immaculate stranger who had played the role of mother like a part she'd never wanted. I didn't come here for your apology, Ava said quietly. I came to stop carrying your silence like it was my shame. She turned before Linda could reply. This time, Ava didn't wait for permission to leave. The rain started just as Ava reached the car. Not a soft drizzle, but a full, unapologetic downpour, like the sky had been waiting for the right moment to break. She didn't run. She let it soak through her coat, drip down her spine, cling to her hair like cold fingers. When she slid into the driver's seat, her breath came in short bursts, the kind you try to disguise as calm. She drove with no destination, just movement, just escape. The windshield wipers swiped frantically across the glass, but the road ahead remained a blur. Headlights pooled in the wet pavement, smeared reflections stretching into the dark. Every turn felt familiar and foreign at once, roads she used to know by heart, now hollowed out by memory. She didn't cry, not yet. She was past crying. There was just that strange emptiness in her chest, the kind that comes after something heavy has been removed, leaving a silence too loud to bear. Her mother's voice echoed anyway. You were a mistake I had to fix. It had been delivered with such flat finality. No venom. Just the kind of truth that doesn't need to raise its voice to devastate. Somewhere near the edge of town, the road curved, and instinct took over. She didn't think, didn't plan. She followed the route like it had been carved into her muscle memory, until the trees thinned and the salt in the air told her where she was going before she saw it. The beach. They used to come here when she was little, before everything calcified, before her mother stopped pretending and her father stopped noticing, before Claire outshone her in every room. Ava pulled into the empty lot and cut the engine. The only sound was the rain, hammering the roof in steady percussion. The ocean lay just beyond the dunes, restless and black, waves rising and falling like breath. She got out, letting the wind slap her face, the rain blur her vision. The cold sank in deep. She walked barefoot down to the shoreline, shoes abandoned in the car. Her coat clung to her legs. Her hair whipped around her face in strands. She didn't care. She stood at the water's edge, the tide creeping close, then receding, again and again. Like it was thinking about taking her, then deciding she wasn't worth the effort. Ava breathed in, sharp and shaky. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter, Evan's words, softened now by wear and salt air. She didn't read it. She just held it close. You weren't a mistake. The wind howled. The waves crashed. The rain kept falling. And for the first time in days, Ava let herself feel everything at once. Not just the grief, but the beginning of something else. A quiet, unspoken kind of freedom. The sky was beginning to pale by the time Ava returned to the car, drenched and shaking, her fingers stiff from cold but unwilling to leave just yet. She turned the engine on, not to drive, but for the heat. The vents blew a slow breath of warmth across her face as she sat in the driver's seat, wrapped in the damp silence of everything she hadn't said out loud. The ocean still roared in the distance, steady and indifferent. She could just make out the horizon now, that soft, uncertain line where sea and sky traded secrets. The beach had emptied her out, or maybe it had made room for something new. She opened the glove box and found the old notebook she kept there, half full of receipts, random to-do lists, phone numbers without names. She flipped past them until she reached a clean page. Then she took out a pen, the same one she used for work notes and grocery lists, and began to write like it was the only way to anchor herself. She didn't write a letter. She didn't address it to anyone. She just wrote. Tolerated love sounds like silence at the dinner table. It's being introduced with vague titles. It's the kind of affection that's conditional on your ability to make other people comfortable. It's love that comes with rules you didn't agree to, but are punished for breaking. Real love looks different. I don't know if I've had it yet, not the unconditional kind, but I think I've seen its shape. It's patient, it listens. It doesn't flinch when you speak too loudly or ask for too much. It doesn't need to be impressed. It just stays. She paused, her pen hovering, then continued. I grew up in a house where love had to be earned, where being chosen was a competition. And I lost, over and over. But maybe it wasn't because I wasn't enough. Maybe it was because the version of me they needed didn't exist. They wanted someone easier to manage, someone quieter, someone who didn't look like a decision they regretted. She stopped, stared at the words, then added, but I'm still here, and I'm done performing for love. Outside, the waves continued their endless rhythm, each one pulling and releasing, pulling and releasing. Ava closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest. She didn't feel better, not really, but she felt clearer. She looked out at the water one last time, then whispered into the empty air, not expecting an answer but needing to say it anyway. I deserve more than survival. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. Ava didn't plan to talk to anyone. She had been sitting on a bench just above the sand, the notebook tucked beside her, the ocean beginning to fade into its softer, daylight version of itself. The rain had stopped. The wind had calmed. The world was pretending to be peaceful again. She noticed the woman before she heard her, late 60s maybe, silver hair pulled into a low braid, a scarf looped neatly around her neck. She walked slowly, not because she had to, but because she was paying attention. A small terrier trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to sniff at the grass. The woman gave Ava a polite nod as she passed, the kind people reserve for quiet strangers, but something made her pause. Do you mind? She asked gently, gesturing toward the empty half of the bench. Ava shook her head. Not at all. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft pant of the dog and the occasional cry of a gull overhead. You look like someone who's just left something behind, the woman said eventually. Ava let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, something like that. The woman didn't press. She just smiled, like she knew all the versions of silence already. It was my mother, Ava offered, unsure why she was speaking. I went back home, for a reunion. She swallowed. She said I was her biggest regret. The woman didn't flinch, just nodded, like the story was familiar. I left, Ava added. Middle of the night, no one followed. The terrier sniffed at Ava's shoes before curling up at the woman's feet. She must have been scared of you, the woman said calmly. Ava blinked. Scared? The woman looked out at the sea. Some people see strength and mistake it for defiance, or danger, especially if it looks like something they were never brave enough to become. Ava didn't respond. Her throat felt tight. Maybe she regrets you, the woman said softly, because she never had the courage to become you. The words landed like warm weight, not heavy, but anchoring. Ava stared at the sand, her heart thudding in a rhythm that didn't feel quite like pain. The woman stood, dusted off her hands. The trick, darling, is realizing that their regret isn't your burden to carry. She clicked her tongue, and the dog jumped up obediently. Before she walked away, she added, You're allowed to walk away from people who taught you love had to hurt. Ava watched them disappear down the path, the dog's tail wagging like punctuation. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like the lost one. She felt like someone starting over, not broken, just beginning. The DNA kit sat on her kitchen counter for 3 days before she touched it. It had arrived in a slim, nondescript box, the kind that looked like it should hold something boring, printer ink maybe, or a phone charger. But inside was something far less ordinary. Instructions, a plastic tube, a tiny vial that could upend an entire identity. Ava circled it like it might flinch. She wasn't angry, not anymore. The rage had burned itself down to something quieter, like coals after the fire. What remained was a question. Not just who was Evan, but who am I if not theirs? The Everly name had never felt like skin that fit, but she'd worn it anyway. Out of habit, out of duty. Now she wasn't sure it had ever belonged to her at all. She stood in the kitchen, fingers curled around the counter's edge. Outside, the city moved in its usual rhythm. Honking horns, impatient footsteps, dogs barking at unseen threats. Her apartment, by contrast, was still. The letter from Evan sat on the table beside her, edges soft from being read too many times. There was no return address, just a name, a beginning. She picked up the kit and read the instructions twice. It was simple, almost absurdly so. A bit of saliva, a barcode, a mailing envelope. For something that could rewrite her entire sense of self, it all felt too casual. She filled the tube slowly, carefully, like it might slip through her fingers. As she sealed the package, she wasn't thinking about Linda or Richard or even Claire. She was thinking about the unknown, the branches of a tree she'd never been shown, faces that might look like hers, patterns she had always thought were hers alone. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. She was done chasing validation from people who measured love in silence and disapproval. This was different. This was hers. A quiet declaration that she wanted to know, not to belong to someone else, but to belong to herself. When she dropped the envelope into the corner mailbox, it made a soft thunk as it landed. Final. Almost insignificant. But to Ava, it felt like a line being drawn, not against her past, but towards something new. She didn't feel hopeful exactly. Hope was too fragile, too breakable. What she felt was steadier. Curiosity without fear. A readiness to face what had always been there, just beneath the surface. As she walked back to her apartment, the wind picked up, lifting her hair, brushing her face like a hand she didn't recognize. For the first time in her life, Ava wasn't asking where she fit in their story. She was starting to write her own. The call came 2 nights after Ava mailed the DNA kit. Her phone lit up just past 11, long after she'd shut her laptop and curled under a blanket on the couch. For a moment, she just stared at the screen. Claire. She let it ring almost to voicemail before answering. Hey, Ava said, her voice cautious. Hey, Claire replied, soft. Is this a bad time? Ava hesitated. It's late. I know, Claire said. I couldn't sleep. There was a pause. No static, just silence threaded with things unsaid. I heard what Mom said at dinner, Claire said quietly. I mean, I didn't hear all of it, not the way you did. But after you left, people were whispering, and I asked. Someone told me, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ava leaned back into the couch, her chest tight. She meant it, you know. I know, Claire whispered. That's what makes it worse. Ava didn't respond right away. She'd spent most of her life assuming Claire knew, that she'd watched and chosen not to see. That her silence had been another kind of alignment, another way of keeping the golden child badge polished. But now, hearing the weight in Claire's voice, this wasn't performative empathy, it was guilt, real and thick and clumsy. I never meant to be the favorite, Claire said. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even like it half the time. It just happened. And I didn't know how to step out of it without losing her too. Ava blinked hard, the ceiling blurring above her. I should have said something, Claire continued. When she cut you down in front of people, when she erased everything you worked for, I should have stepped in. You didn't have to protect me, Ava said. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. But I should have tried. Another pause. Can I ask you something? Claire's voice was thinner now. Why didn't you tell me about the letter, or Evan? Ava swallowed. I didn't think you'd believe me, or care. I care, Claire said, and for once didn't feel like a performance. Maybe I'm late, but I do. A crack, not a collapse. Just the faintest shift in something that had stood too still for too long. Thank you, Ava said, her voice almost a whisper. I want to know what you find out, Claire added. When the results come. If you want to tell me, I mean. Ava exhaled. Okay. They stayed on the phone a while longer, not saying much, but not hanging up either. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Ava was sitting at her kitchen table, halfway through a cup of coffee gone cold, when her phone buzzed with the subject line. Your DNA results are ready. She didn't open it right away, just stared at it, letting the words settle on her skin. It felt too ordinary, tucked between spam offers and work updates, like the truth of her existence could be reduced to a clickable link. When she finally tapped it, her hands were steady. She'd spent weeks preparing for this, rehearsing every version of what the results might say. But seeing it in black and white was something else. Parent 1, Linda Everly, confirmed. Parent 2, Evan L., 99.98% match. Ava let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. No fanfare, no dramatic soundtrack. just the quiet sound of the world clicking into place. It wasn't a surprise, not anymore, but it was still a shift, subtle, seismic, like something inside her spine had finally straightened. She scrolled further, eyes scanning the matches, the traits, the family tree building itself in tidy little boxes. People she didn't know, names she'd never heard, some with photos, smiling faces, unfamiliar eyes. A few looked enough like her to make her breath catch. For a second, she felt like a trespasser. And then she remembered. No, this was hers too. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd simply stepped into a truth that had always been waiting for her. She closed her laptop and sat in the stillness of her apartment. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Evan. She said the name out loud, just to feel it. It wasn't strange. It didn't feel foreign. It felt possible. Ava stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved in its usual rhythm. People rushing, horns blaring, life continuing without pause. But inside her chest, something had stilled. So many things suddenly made sense. Her father's distance, her mother's resentment, the looks, the silences, all the tiny moments that had shaped her like water over stone. She thought about calling Claire, about forwarding the email, about saying, I was right. But it didn't feel necessary. The point wasn't to prove anything anymore. The point was that she knew that the truth wasn't something she had to keep earning. Ava leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, eyes tracing the skyline. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't asking where she belonged. She was standing in it. Evan's office was tucked behind an old bookstore in a quiet corner of the city, the kind of space you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Ava almost walked past it twice before she found the number etched into the weathered brick, just beneath a narrow sign that read, Evan L. Marlowe, Architect. The door opened with a soft chime. Inside, it smelled like sawdust and paper, warm, lived in. Drafting tables lined the walls, sketches clipped neatly to boards, shelves filled with models and worn books. It was quiet but not sterile, the kind of quiet that feels earned. He looked up from a set of blueprints as she stepped in. He had the kind of presence that didn't try to fill the room. Tall, but with a softness in his shoulders. A kindness in the way his eyes, gray, maybe green, landed on hers with polite curiosity. Hi, she said, voice unsure. Are you Evan Marlowe? He straightened, wiping graphite from his palms onto his jeans. That's me. Can I help you? She swallowed. My name's Ava. His face didn't change. Not yet. He waited, listening, the way only someone truly present knows how to. I think I'm your daughter. Silence folded over the room. Not tense, just impossibly still. Evan blinked, once, twice, then slowly stepped back, as if absorbing the weight of her words through his ribs. He started, then stopped. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. Your mother, Linda? Ava nodded. She never told you. His hands gripped the edge of the table behind him. She told me she wasn't keeping the baby, that it would all be handled. Then she disappeared. Her family shut me out completely. I tried, but... He shook his head. I didn't know she had a daughter. His voice was barely above a whisper now, filled with something deeper than shock, grief, and underneath that, wonder. Ava stood still, uncertain what to do with the moment. She had imagined this so many ways, tears, joy, denial, rejection, but not this quiet devastation, not this man who looked at her like he was seeing a part of himself that had been missing for 32 years. I'm sorry, he said, voice breaking. I don't know what to say. She stepped closer. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted to find you. I needed to know if it was true. Evan stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a slow breath, he asked, would it be okay if I sat down? I think I need to sit down. Ava nodded. Me too. They sat across from each other, two strangers tethered by history and silence. And slowly, gently, something long buried began to unfold. Ava wrote the letter late one evening, long after the city had gone quiet. She lit a candle, more for comfort than light, and sat at her kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper. No email, no text, This needed to be written by hand. There was something final about ink on paper, something that couldn't be edited or deleted once it existed. She stared at the blank page for a while, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she finally knew exactly what not to say. She wasn't here to plead. She wasn't here to explain herself. She wasn't reaching toward a woman who had built a wall and called it parenting. She began slowly, her handwriting steady. Dear Mom, this isn't a letter asking for anything, not forgiveness, not understanding, not even acknowledgement. It's just what I need to say before I let go. She paused, then continued. You said once that I made you stronger through regret. At the time, it felt like a wound I'd never stop carrying. But now I see it differently. If I caused you regret, it's because I reminded you of a choice you didn't want to face. And that was never mine to carry. You made decisions, some out of fear, some out of pride, and some, I believe, because you didn't know how to love someone who wouldn't bend to your rules. But I was never broken, just different. And that difference wasn't a flaw, it was a beginning. You don't know the life I've built. You don't know the people who do love me, not for how well I fit into a role, but for who I am when I'm not shrinking. That love may not have come from you, but it came anyway, and I let it in. She looked out the window, the city glowing faintly in the distance, and let the silence guide her hand again. I know about Evan. I know the truth you tried to bury. I found him. He didn't reject me. He didn't recoil. He looked at me like I mattered. And that is something I will carry forward. I'm not writing this so you'll change. I don't need you to. I'm writing this because I deserve to leave this behind without dragging your silence with me. You once told me I was a mistake you had to fix. I'm not. I never was. I'm the result of truth surviving everything you tried to silence. This is goodbye, not the dramatic kind, just the honest kind. Ava. She signed it, folded it, and slid it into an envelope. No tears, no second guessing. Just the clean weight of a chapter closing. And it felt good. Not perfect, not easy, but right. The driveway crunched under her tires the same way it always had. Same gravel, same overgrown hedges trimmed just enough to look intentional. But Ava didn't grip the wheel this time. She wasn't holding her breath. The house looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Morning suits moved quietly across the front lawn. Familiar faces dipped their heads as she passed. She nodded politely, her expression steady. Grief pressed against her chest, not the sharp kind, not the kind that unravels you. This was grief lined with respect. Her grandmother had been flawed, but kind. A quiet witness to Ava's childhood who, in the end, had told the truth when no one else would. The chapel service had been simple, uncluttered, just the way her grandmother would have wanted. No long eulogies, no sanctified half-truths. Just a hymn or two, a few stories, a photo in a wooden frame at the altar. Ava had sat near the back beside Claire, who hadn't let go of her hand once. Now at the reception, she stood beneath the old oak tree near the edge of the yard, the same one she used to climb as a child, knees scraped, palms covered in bark dust. The wind moved through the leaves above her like a slow breath. She saw her mother across the garden. Linda wore black, of course, tailored, immaculate. Her lipstick untouched, her posture perfect. But there was something in her eyes, something unsure. She was watching Ava like she wasn't quite sure who she'd become. Like the woman in front of her wasn't the daughter she'd tried to raise into obedience, or erase into silence. Linda took a step forward, just one. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't move toward her. She simply met her gaze, steady, grounded, whole. Their eyes locked. Then Ava spoke, not with bitterness, not to wound, but because the words were hers now. Undeniable, freeing. I understand why you couldn't love me, she said, voice calm, clear. But I finally love myself, and that's enough. Linda didn't respond. Not with words, just a blink. A flicker of something Ava couldn't, and no longer needed to, name. That was it. No big scene, no redemptive hug, no change of heart, just a truth spoken aloud in a place where silence had once ruled everything. Ava turned and walked back toward the tree, toward Claire, toward the car, waiting quietly at the edge of the gravel. She wasn't running. She wasn't retreating. She was leaving on her own terms, and for the first time, there was no but waiting to undo her.